All right, I think we're ready to start. Got quite a few folks on here. Thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Devin Morris. I am the executive chair for 40th United, an independent political organization in Chicago's 40th Ward. Today we are joined by Alderman Andre Vasquez, the alderman of the 40th Ward. We're also joined by Kenzo Shibata, a teacher activist, and Hilario Dominguez, another teacher activist, as well as Clara, and she is a ASL interpreter for Chicago Public Schools, and also I believe a co-worker of Kenzo, which is super cool. All right, so I figured we'd go over the format of this little town hall. This is our third Politics of COVID series that we've done. So format, we're gonna do like some brief introductions, right? Sorry, I forgot to mention, Ms. Stacy Davis Gates is unfortunately unable to join us due to some last minute stuff in her control. So sorry about that, but I'm totally confident that we have a great group of people to listen to and hear from while we're here. So back to the format. So we have some brief introductions first. We'll go around and hear from each of the people who are participating on the call about what they see the politics of COVID being right now, currently, and with a big focus on education. After that, we'll go around to some pointed question and answers. We've got some pre-submitted questions, but you can also feel free to submit some questions in the chat if you think of anything off the top of your head. Please try not to unmute yourself. It makes it a little bit hard for such a large group to have a conversation if everybody's unmuting yourself. And then in the interest of time, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to get to everybody. Hopefully we do. And then we'll wrap it up at the end with some conclusions and allow folks to plug stuff that they've got going on in their lives, fun podcasts, whatever they got going on. So let's kick it around. First up, I'll kick it over to Alderman Andre Vasquez. Give you 2 or 3 minutes on how you view the politics of COVID, especially in regards to education right now.
Yeah, hey, thank you for having me on, Devin. Thank you all for making the time to talk today. I think we all are seeing more and more like how real it is when you see an executive branch try to assert its power and do all these overreaches. And where I'm really concerned, and I think we're going to see more of it in coming weeks, is really what the influence of corporate interest means. And it's literally a debate that people are having as far as how many lives can we acceptably lose, right? And so I think in situations like watching the fact that Chicago Public Library, they're talking about staff starting this next week to be at the libraries to preparation for reopening, when I don't believe we're anywhere near where we need to be to have that kind of reopening, lets you know that they want to figure out ways to provide daycare so that workers can be out working. And I think that's going to have a lot of ramifications in what we see happen at CPS. And when we have the mayor who's saying she wants to reopen in the fall, when we don't even have an idea what safety looks like, I think it's indicative of really the same kind of stance and perspective across the board, and something we all should be vigilant about and be fighting against.
All right, thanks, Alderman. Let's kick it over to Hilario Dominguez.
Awesome. I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce my little sister, Ana Paula, sixth grader at STEM Academy. I brought her on so she can also share some of her perspective as a student during COVID. Yeah, I agree with a lot with what the Alderman was saying. It's clear that the priorities are corporations right now and not people, right? You see it within our schools, and you see it within the decisions that our mayor's making. I mean, a couple of days ago, she literally gave the permit to a corporation to kill people in Little Village, right? They were about to continue demolishing a building or a power plant, should I say, that was going to spread asbestos and all types of pollution in the air that was just going to exacerbate the impact on the Latinx community in Little Village, on top of the fact that we're one of the highest rated communities that's getting hit with COVID, right? So you're seeing the priorities on corporations rather than the actual resources we need as people to live and to survive, right? I mean, Governor Pritzker said it best: doesn't matter, our livelihoods don't matter if we actually don't have a life, right? So we can't reopen anything if our lives aren't the priority.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Hilario. And thanks to your sister for joining us. That's super cool. All right, I'm going to kick it over to Kenzo. 2 or 3 minutes, talk about the current politics of COVID and education.
Thank you for having me here, Devin. Yeah, what I wanted to talk about is kind of some of the pressures that we're under right now. Where I'm standing right now is basically like, we should not talk about reopening schools until we have this COVID thing, kind of under control. I don't think that there's any reason to actually like reopen schools until that's the case. And, any kind of social distancing measures in place isn't going to do that, because the reason why kids go to school is not just to fill their brains with knowledge, but actually for socialization. And the kids are not getting that under what we're doing. And if we go to school, and even if we had kids 6 feet away from each other, like I teach in high school, how's that going to work out in the hallways? I think it's kind of an all or nothing thing. Like, we need to like shut down everything right now until this is fixed, and then we can start talking about reopening. But I think the cart is really ahead of the horse right now. I'm
doing good. I'm trying to follow, what.
Okay, got it. Seeing in the Tribune, like the pressure's put on us. They're saying, in the Tribune, how they put out that the editorial board put out that piece about how, this isn't adequate. I totally agree with that. The distance learning is not adequate, but at the same time, putting people's lives at risk is not worth it to force the schools back open right now. And one thing briefly I want to talk about too right now, I'm also a parent, and it took weeks for me to get enough internet in my house that I'm paying for, by the way, just so I can teach concurrently with my son, somehow also learning in the other room. How we're doing that every day looks completely different. But I just put down a few $100s on a new router so we can do this, and had to upgrade my internet. And so this is happening all across the city to parents and teachers. We don't have the capacity for this. I think we have to look at this school year as a wash and really focus on social emotional learning, reaching out to students and figuring out how they're doing and getting them those services, because filling their heads with knowledge right now is not working.
Thanks, Kenzo. All right. Oh, before we move on, just wanted to remind folks to make sure not to unmute themselves so we don't get any interruptions. Now I'm going to kick it over to Clara Culligan.
Hi, I am a sign language interpreter, and I actually do work with Kenzo. in the same high school, which is kind of funny. But just to add on to what everybody else has said, I think something that we need to be aware of as well is when we finally do go back and when it is safe, you know, whether it's next year or whatever, I think something that we need to be aware of is that students are going to come back in a completely different mindset that they were when they left. And I think that focusing on, obviously education is important and obviously knowledge is important, but I think focusing on the social emotional well-being of our students is something that should take precedent as well. I know that I'm also a track coach, and we had a meeting with our track kids, and we were just kind of asking them if they were able to work out during this time, if they have the chance to go run on their own. And quite a few of the students said that their parents aren't even allowing them outside. And I know that that's something that for myself, being able to go outside is a lifesaver. And so these kids that aren't able to go outside, whether it's because of their parents' rules or because of the neighborhoods they live in, or just the fear of getting sick, you know, they're going to be experiencing all kinds of traumas that I can't even imagine. And so I think that's something that needs to be on the forefront of all of our minds when we go back. And during this time that we aren't in school, is checking in on them, making sure that they're safe and well taken care of emotionally.
Thanks for that. We do have some folks in the chat who want to hear from our guest, Annabella. So Annabella, do you think you can tell us what it's like? Uh-oh. Do you
Sorry.
think that it's okay? Do you think that you could tell us, Annabella, what your like school day is like during e-learning?
Well, it's really stressful because you have to, sometimes there's like new websites. And since I'm a visual learner, I like when people explain things to me, especially like our teachers. And like for sometimes I think that they expect us to know how to work like the website, and it's just like hard. So yeah.
Have you yourself found any problems using technology right now?
No, but I do know that there are some people who are struggling to like just get on a device so that they are able to do like their homework and other classwork.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So with that, I kind of wanted to kick it over to our teacher friends and ask, what kind of challenges have you seen your students encounter or face right now doing e-learning? I know personally, I teach in Skokie School District 68, and we supply all of our students with iPads one-to-one. And even with supplying those iPads, we still have so many students who are unable to do e-learning. Currently, I'm getting 50 to 60% of my students turning in work. So, Hilario, can just ask you, what other kind of problems have you seen?
Yeah, I'm sure also our other educators are going to hit on this, but I believe that as it stands, remote learning is a privilege, right? You need access, you need some kind of safe space and some type of guidance to help students get through the entire process, right? So in our specific school, we have a large amount of Latinx students as well as undocumented students. These are students that it's very difficult for them to get access to the internet, to devices, right? Once they get devices, a lot of the internet companies ask for credit checks, and a lot of undocumented people can't produce those documents to be able to get that, right? So access is difficult. Then on top of that, you have the lack of parental support or guidance there. A lot of our parents are working 12-hour shifts in warehouses like Amazon that refuses to give workers fair pay, right? So you have that as well. And then you have safety and safe space and just a quiet space. You should see how many of my students have a difficult time finding a quiet space. It's like a joke, but also not a joke with how much we have heard just in Zoom meetings and trying to have Google Meet meetings with your students in the household. It's very difficult to have that space for learning. So overall, to me, the fact that remote learning is a privilege and we have a district that isn't recognizing that with grading policies that are really perpetuating these like Jim Crow-ish type laws is disgusting, right? It's like a stubborn ideology trying to maintain this normalcy that just doesn't exist during the most abnormal time that we've ever lived through. You know, the idea that grades are what's going to motivate kids right now, I think is just a false generalization. I think kids want community, kids want safety, kids want the comfort of being with their classmates, with their teachers. I don't think it's them getting an A that is making them get on and do remote learning. And I don't think it's the fear of not being able to get an A that's also not getting them online. And the sooner we recognize that, I think the more radical we'll shift our thinking to really include kids' social well-being and entire well-being during this time.
Yeah, thanks for that. So to build off of what you said with grading, I know my school district kind of learned from the backlash of what some activists were saying about grading this final semester for CPS students. Kenzo, just a quick question, like, how do you think that grading is affecting students socially, emotionally, and what kind of an impact is that having in your school right now?
I mean, from my experiences, I have juniors and seniors, and they aren't that concerned about grades. And they shouldn't, I'm not saying they should be, but they aren't at the moment right now. I'm also like, the way I've been restructuring my classroom is I've given all my kids A's. Like I've not focused on that. I don't want that to be their drive. And, you know, like Hilario was saying, like it is a privilege being able to get behind that computer. So I'm providing them with instruction, but it's not punitive in any way. With students right now worrying about being able to make rent, and I'm not just saying like their parents making rent. I have students that are supporting their families right now. They're not thinking about their grades. And, you know, I want to touch on that a bit is, you know, what this has really highlighted, this crisis, is the extreme poverty our students are living under. When my students are going full time right now to work instead of going to school, it's not because they're looking for cigarette and comic book money. They're helping support their families. And a lot of them have talked to me about how like their parents have lost their, you know, maybe even living wage jobs. So now everyone in the family has to get part-time or some sort of work just to bring money because rent isn't being forgiven. None of these things are being forgiven. And so they are taking on these full-time jobs that they really shouldn't be doing. And these are young people who are not getting their PPE, not getting hazard pay. And the last thing they're worried about right now is, you know, the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So, Annabella, it looks like you're super popular in the chat. What is motivating you right now? How are you feeling about grades?
I think we should, like, it's kind of hard to think about grades while there are some students who are dealing with people who have been affected by the coronavirus or like with other family issues. Like I had one and I wasn't worrying as much about like for my work, but for my family. And when like there are students who might be worrying about their work because sometimes they don't have the essentials to be doing it. And yeah.
Thank you so much for your answer. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure you're doing your absolute best right now. So I wanted to kick it over to Clara to talk about some of the challenges that she's seen students face, especially being an ASL interpreter.
Yeah, so something that a lot of interpreters realized is across the nation when we went remote is that students, I mean, a lot of educational interpreters have never worked remotely. So I actually have like a background set up and I didn't have that before because in order to interpret most effectively, you should have a background that's not distracting. You should be wearing clothes that are not distracting. So that's one thing that we kind of needed to figure out. And I don't have kids, but if you have kids, you have to have a space where you can be in quiet, just like teachers do. And another thing that we found too is with a lot of these programs, CPS is not allowing us to use Zoom as a platform for remote teaching. We have to use Google Meets, which actually is very similar to Zoom, and you can do the grid view, but you have to download a separate extension onto your Chrome in order to get the grid view. And so a lot of students, if they were just on their phones, they had to decide whether they wanted to watch the teacher or watch the interpreter, because you could only have one person visible, and not every student has two devices to be able to watch both the teacher and the interpreter at the same time. Something else that a lot of deaf students have a low, they're not always very skilled in English and reading and writing English. And so communicating mostly through emails is not the most effective for them. So for everything that happens so fast, and to try and teach these students how to access interpreters through email, and at the same time, you're not allowed to have one-on-one video meetings with students to be able to walk them through that has been difficult. I think we're finally reaching a place, 5, 6, however many weeks in we are, where all of our students have devices that they can use, whether they're borrowed from the school or we figured out some sort of workaround on their own phones. But that's definitely been a challenge, and it's taken us however many weeks and our school only has 11 kids. So to figure out for 11 kids, it takes that much time, and that's only a small portion of the deaf and hard of hearing students in the school. So that's definitely something that's been a struggle. And I know that I've talked to some of my special ed teacher friends, and they're saying it's very similar for students who have special needs that aren't neurotypical, and they're struggling to figure out how to do the devices as well. And that's definitely been a struggle.
Thanks for that.
Relevant question from the chat. Clara, do you feel that Zoom would be a better platform for this? And I guess kind of related to that, why is CPS only using Google?
I'm not sure why CPS is only using Google. I know that they are very strict on what vendors we are allowed to use. And I think part of the reason why they've gone with Google Meets is that it's attached to a Google Classroom, and that's something that a lot of teachers were using before remote learning, and now they're relying on it. And through the Google Classroom, you can set up a Meet, and so it's only open if the teacher's on, and so it's a little bit more private in that way. I think once we figured out that you can set up the grid setup for Google Meets, I think it's pretty comparable to Zoom, but it took a while to figure out because we had never used Google Meets before remote learning. So I think it's okay now, but it's definitely been a learning curve.
Thanks for that. Alderman Vasquez, I just wanted to kind of kick it over to you because it sounds like one of the big things that a lot of students are having trouble with, and not just students, but as we heard from Kenzo, teachers, is the access to internet and devices. So what do you think the city could be doing better in order to make sure that everybody has access to internet and devices?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot. It's hard to say what they could be doing better. And the reason I say that is because talking about like the internet as like a public utility is something that people have been talking about before the pandemic. So I think it's difficult to tell people they should have been more proactive prior, right? I think in the moment that we're in, it's hard for me to make the same judgment because when you have a pandemic and you're talking about a government trying to tackle so many things at once, trying to focus on internet, as important as it is, it's still a challenging thing because you've got to talk to the current providers, the infrastructure to get to a certain point. So I think what ultimately two things that have to be figured out in order to get something actionable and quick, right? Some of it would have to be, are you subsidizing some of the cost meaning these providers are getting paid by the government to be able to provide it. I think if they were on their game, so to speak, they'd be offering it free anyway during the pandemic, because it's how you add on customers after, right? Like even in their model of how they view things, that actually makes sense. But I think it's up to government to figure out, one, how to cover that cost, or two, what ultimately a public-private partnership might look like, because government does not know how to set up the infrastructure that's already been set up. All those are large challenges, but there's things that are coming up before the councils. So the Economic Development Committee, what was introduced last meeting was about making internet more of a public utility, or being able to offer it. Excuse me, it got postponed, so there's going to be a hearing coming forward. So we also have the stakeholders, the different companies, and get more of a sense of it. But I think something else that Kenzo said that I think he said in like one sentence, but I think it adds up, is trying to make the year a wash, because everyone keeps acting like we're not in a pandemic. Like no one's been through this. No one on this call has lived through this, because the last time it happened was 1918. And I know some of y'all might have made it that far, but not everybody. But we don't know what this is like. And to really think about the kind of trauma that we're all going through, and then somehow separate that from the fact that these children and students are also going through trauma, and having these expectations on them of like, hey, you still got to make the grade. You still got to figure this out. I don't think that's a reasonable way to think about it. And even before all this, the educational system that our country has is one that trains workers. It's, hey, you're going to sit and you're going to stare at a wall, and this person's a person you have to like listen to as the authority. There's different ways to learn. I think potentially this is an opportunity for us to look at what that could look like going forward. And speaking about like the inequities, look how much meals the schools are giving away. That's how poor people are. And like, yeah, I think we need to really sit back and reassess what it means on all fronts. And internet is something we have got to work on. It's just because of all the players involved, it's a harder one to kind of move quickly.
So just to bring it back to grades for a second, Hilario and Kenzo, has, to your knowledge, CPS included teachers in the conversation on whether or not there are grades? I know my school district included the both our co-presidents of our union in any decision making that's been done. To both of your knowledge, has that been done at all?
I'd like to, or I think CPS would like to say they've included us. Have they really? Well, no. I think they'd give you the political yes, we have. But have they really asked us about the impact of having letter grades right now? No, they haven't. I think McDade and Jackson are stuck in this ideology that grades are going to work right now. That's the only thing that's motivating kids, right? And back to Alderman Vasquez's point, to think that grades are what is motivating kids during a pandemic right now is silly, right? Like, no one knows how to respond to this. So you think kids are going to be like, man, I got to get my A. Let me get on and work. Some of my hardest working kids, the kids that do well during the school year, normal school year, they haven't been able to get on. It's not because they don't care or because they're not motivated. They're worrying about other things. And one day this week, on the very same day, I found out that a kid's father passed away. Another kid was getting tested for COVID. And in my personal life, 2 uncles were tested positive. We're not worrying about A's and B's right now. We're worrying about living. Give us all having that pass-fail system that the union has been fighting for, right? Isn't about giving every kid a pass and trying to be, like soft here. It's being empathetic. We're being compassionate to what's happening. No one knows how to respond right now, right? So the idea that grades are what's going to keep kids going is silly, and I think it's going to actually be hurtful to our students.
Kenzo, did you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, I all that time prior to spring break, like Clara was saying, that was us trying to figure out how to do it, like, you know, how to set up our houses and how to make this all happen. And you know, just this whole attitude that we aren't just, you know, we're trying to get people to survive, like, right, like, I think that we need to re-envision what our jobs are as teachers right now. And you know, right now it is, you know, tending to the needs of our students, and right now those needs aren't grading them. And the Board of Ed in its such an opportunity with the new mayor to not do things as they've always done them and just, you know, pushing policy on us. They had the opportunity to work with the union and listen, because I know that the union's recommendations were informed by teachers and by parents and students as well. And just the impression that like things aren't working right now so great with e-learning because we're not trying our hardest is not helpful to anyone. Because I could tell you right now, I'm working twice as hard as I usually do, and in getting, I'm not even so sure what the results are, to be honest. I don't know how much students are learning. It's really hard to check in with them to figure out what's going on, get those, you know, formative assessments going. So yeah, the board needs to be good actors with us and, you know, treat us with good faith and listen, but they're not.
Yeah. Can we also talk about, I mean, I'm sure Kenzo can talk about this more. In high school, they often use the argument, right, that like, well, would they need the grades for college, right? But when we look at what colleges are doing right now, they're also implementing pass-fail systems.
Yep.
Right. So if our benchmark is college level, getting our kids ready for college, right, then shouldn't we look at and follow what the higher institutions are doing, if that's the case, right? And if they're doing pass-fail, why aren't we? No college, I imagine, and I hope that they're gonna, when they're, you know, looking at applications, they're going to say, oh man, this kid got an F in 2020. He didn't try. I think everyone knows there's a pandemic in 2020. I think they're going to take that into account when they are reviewing applications. And so whenever, you know, I don't know what parents have said in high school so much, Kenzo, but maybe you can speak on that. It's just something that frustrates me because colleges, many colleges are putting in pass-fail, and we should be following that system too.
The seniors are okay. The ones that got accepted are pretty much okay. What I'm really concerned about the seniors is they're not getting a good senior experience, and they're not going to remember high school fondly.
Right.
Like usually when you think back, you remember your senior year, you remember graduation and the school brunches and, you know, all the little things. And they're not going to have that. And that's really where my heart goes out to them. But one thing I think CPS could be doing, and all it takes is some leadership, is on transcripts in 2020, write the word COVID. Just have like, this was their grade under COVID, a little asterisk or something. And the colleges, like Hilario, what you're saying, they'll get it. They'll understand. They just need to understand that we are living in a new reality and we need to construct new structures around that.
Yeah, to both your points, we're not doing A, B, C, D. We're not even doing pass fail at my school district. We're doing here's what you did well this year. Here's what you could work on this summer, right? So there's multiple ways to look at it. And to both of your points, many people think that even pass fail is too harsh right now.
I just want to clarify, it's pass fail, but with everyone passing. So it's like, it's pass fail as a system, you know, but everyone's passing, no one's failing. Like that was the union's that's the union stance.
Yeah.
I mean, you turn in 3 assignments during a pandemic, you should be applauded for that. Even if, you know, that turns out to be a 20% on your report card, you did 3 assignments when you were worrying about living.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, let's take a look at some of the stuff that's been going on in the news. There's been a lot of criticism from CTU members and CTU officials about Mayor Lightfoot's handling of how she messages Black and brown youth across the city to go home. There's one incident where she rolled up on a playground where kids did look to be socially distant, did look to have their masks covered, and proceeded to yell at them to go home. Activists have criticized this. As teachers, all of you, do you think there's a better way to handle this? Clara, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Yeah, it's interesting because so I live in Lincoln Square, so very close, just under the border of 40th Ward. But you know, I live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and walking around or going on runs, I see many groups of predominantly white children not socially distancing, hanging out in the park. There's a little BMX type trail about a mile south of here, and just the other day I saw, you know, hordes of kids on bikes, hordes of kids hanging out playing football. And so I do think that there is a difference in how, depending on what neighborhood you're in, depending on what skin color you have, there is a difference in how you're being treated, I think, by not only the mayor, but a lot of police officers in the city. I think that generally, I'm a little biased because I have I believe that being outside as much as you can, as long as it's safe and you're being safe, is good for your well-being. So I think as long as kids can be outside and safe outside, I think that that's a positive thing. I don't think that we should be telling kids to stay at home, especially when you don't know what their home lives are. You don't know, you know, if there may be somebody sick at home and that's maybe why they're outside. You know, you don't know. And I think that there needs to be stronger messaging on what is safe. And obviously we're still figuring that out. Scientists are still researching that. We don't know for sure what's safe, but I think that there should be more messaging around that and more open spaces for people to safely be outside.
Yeah. Kenzo, if you saw a group of students out at the playground, how would you approach the situation to tell them to be safe?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, you approach them with a question like, you shoo kids away. We have no idea what those students or those young people's lives are like. If they have a home to go to, if that home is a safe place for them to be. You know, they could have been in a situation where the parents are like, get out of the house for a few hours. Like, we don't know why those young people are outside. And I think, you know, if I were, you know, in that situation, I'd say like, hey, don't you know, like, about the, you know, the mayor could have walked around with a big bag full of masks and maybe some literature about things you can be doing and also socially distant, and talk to the kids and just be like, hey, you know, do you have anything else to do? Here are some suggestions. Here are some masks. I think that would go a lot further than just being another cop in their life and just shooing them away. We don't know what shooing them away meant. Like when the cameras went away, I'm sure those young people went right back to where they were as soon as the cameras went away and the mayor went away. It was a publicity stunt. And I don't know if y'all remember Lean On Me, but it reminded me of like the Joe Clark BS, where it's something that a lot of like white taxpayers like, is seeing, you know, Black and brown people being really hard on Black and brown kids. And that's the messaging I saw there. And I don't think it's productive, and it's not motivating the kids to find other social outlets.
Hilario, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, first I wanted to get Anna Paula's view on it. I know she's popular in the chat room, but kind of phrase it as, Anna, you know, how would you feel if an adult approached you by yelling at you, screaming at you to go home?
I agree with Kenzo because maybe she doesn't know, like, what if my house doesn't even have a backyard, but I just want to like just not like be stressed, and like you're just stuck in your house not doing anything. And then after, like, she knows what like everyone, or she at least should know what everyone's going through, and for her to just be approaching students, telling them to go home, like as long as they're being safe, like I think they should be able to go outside and like not just be stuck in their house.
I was coming for her next, for sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we have to say this more, that Black and brown children are over-policed in this country. Black and brown people are over-policed in this country. And the over-policing of people of color is killing us. That's a fact. That just has to be said more. People just have to start with that, right? A brother was shot and killed by two white men that thought they could police him because they were racist, because they were bigots, you name it, right? So when our elected leaders, our most high elected leader in Chicago, approaches young Black boys with a policing attitude, it's so hurtful, right? She should be setting the example of how to approach young people, especially young people of color. But instead, she's exacerbating discriminative practices. That could have been such a teaching lesson. Right? But since she has the background of a cop, we saw how she approached it, right? Mary said this, Mary DeFino, shout out to Mary DeFino on Twitter, said that we should have elected leaders serve as substitutes for a week as a prerequisite. I think that would have helped that approach.
So Alderman Vasquez, do you think we can get you to sign up to be a sub in one of our local school buildings?
I don't know if I'm built for that, but I'd give it a shot. Yeah, I think kind of like Clara, I was conflicted, but on a different angle, and I'll kind of explain it, right? Like, I think staying at home is definitely what we should be telling people to do, especially when we're finding out kids are getting inflammatory diseases that are COVID related. When we've got, you know, to what we've said here, people whose parents are essential workers, they're coming back home potentially sick or asymptomatic, right? I think telling people to stay at home is the right thing to do in this moment. That I agree with. So what was interesting about that day is I saw the press conference prior to that occurring, and the tone that she struck to me was like, okay, that's solid. Like, you're being firm and you're letting people know it's not a joke. When it then, I felt like it appeared to me as she walked away from that conference, there happened to be kids playing. She might have felt the cameras were around and had to like do a thing to be in line with the messaging. I don't believe that was the right way to go. If you were to ask me what I would have told the kids, I probably would have listened first rather than told them anything. Like I used to get kicked out of Grant Park by the police every weekend, or Navy Pier, just because I was with other kids trying to like do music or hang out together, right? So I don't, and like, I don't know, I got raised, my parents raised me like, if anybody but my parents tell me to do anything, I'm not listening to that. My parents are the ones who tell me. Somebody else, like, you didn't raise me, I don't know what you're talking, like, so I know that mentality and that culture is out there because we've been in situations where people can approach us with not the best intent, right? So I think it's a hard line of balance, but I'll tell you this, it's inequitable because up here on the north side of town, everybody's walking around without their masks. They're not respecting social distancing, and nobody's coming up here to check them like that, right? Like, I have to, in my role, I have to make sure when I talk to the officers, right, because we're in communication, I try to get them to do at least patrolling of the parks or do something. But whatever we do has to be across the board. Like, the fact that you're on the south and west side and they have a curfew instilled and there's nothing like that going on this side of town kind of tells you that there's the same problems that we've seen. It's what everyone keeps saying about the pandemic. But the pandemic is not creating these problems. It is shining a spotlight on them and exacerbating them. So, yeah, I think some folks need to do a lot more listening, and it would be more effective in helping all of us reach to the point where we need to be at, which is being at home and staying safe if it's possible.
Yeah, so in your conversations with police officials, have you asked them or have they said anything about how they approach telling folks to go back home, or they approach their conversations, or what those conversations have looked like?
Yeah, and I'll keep it 100. Like, the officers aren't really feeling being out there, right? Like, they are exposing themselves as well. Like, I know sometimes we don't like to view them as people sometimes because of what that institution and the system is. But like, a lot of them, they got families that come home too, and they don't want to be in those interactions. So even when I'm saying like, hey, if you can patrol and maybe you get on the megaphone and try to get people to disperse, like, they're open to it, but they also know that they're spread thin, and even trying to no one has a clue how to truly like function in this moment. And so I think even when you're talking about like law enforcement, they don't know what it means, and they're seeing people pass away quicker than the rest of the population, right? Like, so I think this is something that we're all kind of working through. But like I said, I'm in the 40th ward. My interactions are much different than I would imagine law enforcement is any other part of town. So it's kind of hard for me to gauge. Yeah.
So I have a pre-submitted question here from Karen in the 40th. She said, my son is due to start kindergarten at Chappelle in the fall, which is in the 40th ward. What plans are being made for social distancing of kindergarten students who seem mainly incapable of that expectation? And then the second part of the question was, I'm an essential worker who works with extremely vulnerable older adults. What are strategies to ensure children don't become vectors?
I mean, I know this is probably for the teachers. I'll just say this. Kindergartners don't seem to be hard to social distance. They are hard to social distance. They are kindergartners. It is ridiculous to think that like they're going to chill in their little cubicle like it's office space, right? Like it's not how it works. So I would, yeah, I'll defer to the teachers on this, but I know what I think. So yeah.
I mean, I'm not a kindergarten teacher, but I, had a kindergartner a couple of years ago, and like their learning is so tactile and so play based. And like, a kindergarten teacher comes home with snot all over her, his or her pants at the end of the day. It's just how they learn. And I don't know, I could see it being pretty, I'm not a psychologist, but I could see it kind of being kind of damaging on a little kid's mind. The teacher saying, get away from me, don't touch me all day.
Hilario, did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say that I don't know. And a lot of the teachers I work with K through 8. I'm a special education teacher. But a lot of our kindergarten teachers and our preschool teachers are asking the same questions, right? So when the mayor goes on air and says, we're definitely starting in the fall with almost no answers to any of these questions, it's just so hard to get behind that, right? Like, how, when, what, and that goes to a lot of kids, not just kindergartners. Let me tell you, middle schoolers, all the way down, even high schoolers, we all struggle social distancing. If you've gone to Mary Bartlemy Park, a park over here in the West Loop, you'll see that there's a lot of people that struggle with social distancing.
Yeah, as a former kindergarten teacher with 24 kids in my CPS classroom, not quite sure what social distancing would look like there. Annabella, how do you think middle schoolers do social distancing in school?
I think it's pretty hard because we're all used to like kind of being together and like just like not having that like part of your day where you can't see your friends, you can't even like just like be face to face with someone. It's like really hard, and I think that a lot of people and students are struggling to do that, especially if they're your family members.
Do you think going back to school, it would be easy, medium, hard to social distance inside school if you were to go back in the fall?
I think it would be pretty hard because there are some people who might be like, oh hey, or like, but there are some people who might be like, don't get close to me, or like don't touch me, but like I'm like just like worried, or like how other people may react to the situation of being close to one another.
Yeah, I teach middle school now where I used to teach kindergarten, and I could tell you my 8th graders definitely had a hard time social distancing while we were still in school. Clara, I wanted to ask you, like on terms of like social distancing, what kind of troubles do you think or problems may arise for deaf students when it comes to social distancing?
So I think that a lot, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of deaf students have a tough time accessing written English. And it is also not uncommon for deaf students to have other disabilities as well. I think that from my experience, and I've been an educational interpreter for now 8 years in all settings. Quite often you find that deaf students, they learn visually, right? And so not only is it as simple as making a spoken lecture into a signed lecture, but there's also a lot of visuals that go into that, and there's a lot of gesturing and showing and having the students kind of follow along with their bodies, following you along on like what to do and how to do these certain skills and everything. And I think that not only for deaf and hard of hearing students, but for a lot of special education students, it would be difficult to try and not only teach without being close to each other, but also to teach that, like, teach why maintaining a distance is important. And a lot of kids, you know, they learn through being, and I'm thinking more of like younger students I've worked with, not necessarily in the high school, but students learn by being close to you, and especially students that may not be neurotypical, they're not going to understand why we have to maintain a distance, or why they can't be next to their best friend, or I foresee that being very difficult. And as it is, a lot of special education classrooms are already full, or they might be in the smallest room in the school, you know, just kind of like tucked away. And so I think that if we were to go back, that would definitely need to change. And if there's an expectation that we're supposed to teach while maintaining social distance, I think a lot of the schools just aren't big enough to hold all of the students that we have.
Yeah. So we have a question submitted anonymously by somebody in the 40th Ward. It's kind of like a hard one. They only want you to give a one-word answer. And the question is, when it comes to opening up Chicago schools, who do you think should be the ultimate person in charge of making that decision? Governor Pritzker, Mayor Lightfoot, the Illinois State Board, local school councils, or teachers and staff? I'll kick this one over to Hilario first.
I don't know. It's so hard to give a one-word answer, you know, and also didn't like all those choices necessarily. I really think it should be a communal decision, right? Teachers, staff, parents, students, community members, elected leaders. It really should involve everyone at the table.
Kenzo?
I agree with that 100%. I can't give a one-word answer for that. You know, there are so many people looking at this issue from so many different angles and have so many different, you know, experiences and expertise in it, that it can't just be one person where the buck stops there. It has to be a team effort, and it has to include the people most affected, including, you know, students and parents.
Clara?
Yeah, I basically agree with that. I think for sure, though, teachers and students need to be involved in that decision-making process, because we're the ones that are actually in it. You know, the Pritzker and Lightfoot, I know that they have other perspectives, and this is definitely not a one-word answer, but they have other perspectives in the matter and other priorities, but you have to consider the people that are actually going to be affected and actually in it.
And Alderman Vasquez, I guess you're going to go over one word too.
No, I mean, I had one word, so everybody else was ready to go. Yeah, my word was gonna be parents. Like, it shouldn't be any elected official. It shouldn't be anyone telling you that your kid has to go to school. Your kid's the one that's gonna get sick. Your kid is the one that could potentially die. We were talking about a pandemic. So for me, if you had to limit it to one, I'd be like, that's who calls that. Because to have a government tell a parent, like, your kid has to go to school, yeah, they could die, but it's been determined. I don't understand that. So if it had to be one, that's where I would go. But it should definitely be all the stakeholders. So.
All right, thanks for that. So gonna actually wrap this up soon. We've got some last questions for y'all before we let you go. Three-parter. Are you streaming anything good right now? Do you have any final thoughts? And are you ready to plug anything? Kenzo.
So I subscribe to this new channel called Means TV. It's like left political content. It's kind of like a left version of Netflix. So I've been digging into that, checking out that new programming. It's $10 a month. It's stuff you can't find elsewhere. I'll plug. You mentioned podcasts at the beginning, Devin. I got one. It's called Class Time. Just go search on Apple or wherever, and yeah. And if you don't like what I have to say, you can find me on Twitter and yell at me. People do it all day. It's fine.
Hilario and Annabella.
Annabella, me first. So guilty pleasures. We've been watching a lot of reality TV on this end, but I'm not going to plug that in. I just want to be vulnerable here and say what we've been watching. But no, but on a more bright note, C2U partnered up with a Fox to highlight teachers giving real lessons. So I wouldn't be a good union member if I didn't plug that in. I also sit on the board for an organization called Save Money, Save Life. And we've been giving out emergency PPE kits as well as groceries to families in the South and West Side. We'd love to come up on the North Side, Alderman Vasquez. So if there's any families that are in need, please hit us up. Save Money, Save Life on every platform. And then last but not least, I'd like to plug in the work that the union's doing with a lot of pushing back on the grading policy, as well as some recent guidelines that ODLSS released on diverse learners. It's really just crazy what they expect diverse learner instructors to do, as well as case managers. And it's really hurting the students and the families at the end of the day. So yeah.
For sure. Do you want to put those links in the chat so everybody has access? All right, for sure. Clara, anything you're streaming? Do you have something to plug? Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Thank you for setting this up. I think this is really great. And it's awesome to have a group of people that are willing to partake in these conversations and to look towards the future, regardless of what the future holds. Things that I've been streaming, I guess I'm just catching up on season 3 of Westworld. I don't know. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately. S-Town, I just finished that. It's a short one. It's from This American Life, I believe. Really good. And Dolly Parton's America, also same group, but really awesome. I did not grow up with country, but now I really appreciate Dolly Parton. So
cool. Anything to plug?
No, not really.
Alderman Vasquez, what you've been streaming, final thoughts, and you got something to plug?
Well, I'm just glad I caught up to Last Dance because that's the right moment. Something about the way that got pushed just keeps me focused. But the one thing that I want to jump into is I saw it on Netflix. I think it's called Trial by Media, and so it talks about like really the how public opinion plays into all these cases. And the last episode is about Blagojevich. So, yeah, so I'm can't wait to like dig into that one. There's a lot that I want to check out. As far as last thoughts, I just really appreciate this platform to be able to talk to you all because like, man, well, it's Jerry's Grill, right? That's the one that just closed on Montrose. So that was the first time me and Kenzo like had face-to-face conversation. So to be in a space, right? So to be able to be in a space like this and talk to you all and have neighbors around, I just really appreciate it. So I want to thank you all for that. And as far as things to plug, we got the 40th Ward Neighbor Network. So Hilario will be talking for sure. Save money, save lives. We'll get the conversation going. But we have neighbors who are they're sewing masks for people. They're doing pickup and delivery. They're doing phone banking. We've got an events team, communications, people helping us with legislation. So we just want to make sure that neighbors stay involved because it's a good way to get everyone connected and continue to do the work. So I will post that link up right now. I'm glad I got last, so I got a heads up to get the link. But yeah, and thank you to all the neighbors that showed up here. If they're in the ward, like feel free to reach out to us and get plugged in with the group here, because I'm limited in what I can do in government. I can't do anything political out of that side of the house, is how we talk about it. But here's a really good space for people who want to move the agenda, make things more progressive, and not just accept the status quo. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, just to wrap it up, thank you so much to the educators who joined us. Thank you, Alderman Vasquez, for joining us. My name is Devin Morris. I'm the executive chair of 40th United, a progressive political organization in the 40th Ward. I know we've been spamming you in the chat. Please join our email list that's in there. And then if you want to become a monthly member, a voting member, that is also in the chat. Heather, our secretary, has been throwing it up the entire time, bothering everybody. And thank you for that, Heather. Really appreciate it. But again, thanks to everybody who joined us. We're going to do another one in 2 weeks. Same link, so you don't have to register again. If you registered for this one, you're good to go. That's about it. Thank you again, Hilario, Kenzo, Clara, Alderman Vasquez. We really appreciate all of you, and we appreciate everybody for coming. Take care,
All
everyone.
right, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, take care.
To your right. Oh, right where you were.
We're still Facebook Live.
Yeah, how do we?
Police station across the bridge usually is heavily